All right, so today I want to talk about a story or a story slash topic that I've talked about before, but I wanted to talk about again because this whole green energy scam is always in the news. And again, a lot of people are so uneducated, and again, I don't like using that word. That's just the word that came to my mind on this topic, um, for the simple reason that it's kind of a scam. And getting right into it, so this is the problem of wind turbines that can't be recycled. So they're piling up in landfills basically, and the problem is they're massive, massive things. I mean, you can see this picture here, like one wing is taking up well past a full-on flatbed here, and that's a long flatbed. So, and it sticks off, looks like a good 15, 20 more feet. So again, those things are really big. Let's read a little bit about this here. While most of a turbine can be recycled or find a second life, on another wind farm, researchers estimate the okay, so apparently most of it can, but again, a lot of it, apparently the wings can't. I don't know what else. Researchers estimate the U.S. will have more than 720,000 tons of blade material to dispose of over the next 20 years, a figure that doesn't include newer, taller, higher capacity versions. That's the other problem too, is that they're consistently getting bigger, which means more, size, volume, weight, harder to move, all this kind of stuff. So again, I'm not going to read the whole article, but again, you can go read, you can read articles till the cows come home when it comes to this stuff. But this is the problem with green energy in general, specifically wind and solar, is that it's not what it's made out to be. The environmentalists are lying to people, for the simple reason that they make it seem a lot better than it actually is. Now, to make my position perfectly clear, I would be fine with renewable energy, assuming that the cost isn't going to go up compared to the current amount, and there's going to be no blackouts, and that's basically the main thing. And like I say, it's just as good basically. The problem is that renewables still lag way behind. Like I say, it's like comparing a professional, Connor McDavid to a beer leaguer at this point, for the simple reason that it's still way behind. I believe wind is about 0.02% of Alberta's uh, energy. And I mean, if you go down south, especially like the more eastern side of the province, anywhere south of about Red Deer and going down. And I haven't been too far south of Calgary before, so I can't speak for there, but I assume there's quite a few there too. There's actually quite a few wind turbines, like quite a few. Yet it still accounts for like an incredibly, incredibly small percent of our total energy. So, and the problem too is that the demand continues to go up too. Like the demand continues to go up too. So this is one of the many problems that the environmentalists don't tell you. Like I said, the main problem they don't tell you is how inferior it is compared to oil and gas. They seem to think that, oh, if you put solar panels on your roof, then you're good to go, which they don't tell you that it's going to cost you probably $25,000 to get the solar, which 90% of people can't just pay out of their pocket, which means you're going to have to finance it, which means interest. And the other problem with that is that they don't last forever too. That's the other problem that people seem to think is, oh, I build my house, I put solar on the roof, and I'm good for the rest of my life. Well, no, that's not the case. That's not the case. You're going to have to redo it every 10 to 20 years. Uh, like I say, people. Another thing. Here's the other big myth that I hear also too is people say, "Oh, well, once you have it in, it's free energy." Again, that's very misleading. That's like saying that you finance a car for 5 years and be like, "Yeah, I got a free car after 5 years." Well, technically you do, but you still paid the full cost plus interest. And that's the thing too is that yeah, you technically do have free energy after you pay for your solar panels, but you pay the full cost plus interest. So again, they're people they don't think things through. Plus, people say, "Oh, I won't have to pay for my heat, my utility bill," which you'll still have to pay for some of it. Again, you'll still need water. And then the other problem too is that we don't have nearly good enough technology yet to run completely off renewables. Again, not even close. And people say, "Oh, we're 5 years." We're like again, Elon Musk who, again, I agree with on some of what he says, but he greatly exaggerates the amount of time it's going to take to do this kind of stuff. I mean, look back at history. Like, people thought we'd have flying cars by now. We'd be living living like we're actually going to be living like 100 years from now. So again, people greatly overestimate, or sorry, underestimate the amount of time that it takes to do this kind of stuff. Like, I don't think I would bet money that we won't be completely 100% renewable in my lifetime. And I'm going to be around at least another 50 years. So, and unless there's a massive, massive, and we're talking probably hundreds of times, um, improvements on top of the technology we currently have. And one of the main problems too is the battery technology. Too, people seem to think, oh, we can just store excess energy in batteries. Well, the first problem is that unless you have an incredibly high amount of wind and solar, there's probably not going to be much energy, if any, to store. And the other problem is, even if there is, well, battery technology is very, very, very poor. You can't just store infinite amounts of energy in batteries. In fact, you can barely store any. If you look at of the technologies in the world, since batteries have been invented, they've barely improved. Like, it would be the equivalent to still, having like non-colored TVs. Like, that would be the equivalent if we're talking about batteries. So like TVs from like 25, 30 years ago, like before I was even born. Which is fun, scary to think about, but that's, like I say, the other problem. So the big problem with the whole wind and solar is you have people who are incredibly naive. They just blindly believe other people's stuff. Like, they don't check into it whatsoever. And the other problem too is that the whole we need to go towards wind and solar and renewables is based off false premises anyway. That, like I said, the idea of we need to transition towards wind and solar goes something like this. Well, oil and gas is a finite resource, which is technically true, but again, they're lying about that. And if we don't, we're going to destroy. If we don't go towards renewables, we're going to destroy the planet. So they're either misleading you by saying that, or they're outright lying. Most people are just so illiterate and ignorant they don't even know what the hell they're talking about, because if they did, they would acknowledge this kind of stuff, and the stuff I'm going to get into. So the first thing being is that, yes, oil and gas is a finite resource. But what they don't tell you is that we have hundreds of years, maybe even thousands. I don't know, but like I say, they routinely discover enough oil and gas in individual discoveries to power the earth for like 50 years, or have enough oil and gas for like 50 years. And that's like individual discoveries. So the whole idea that we need to transition away, like, how do we know we don't have 1,000, 2,000 years of oil and gas that's yet to be discovered? I mean, we clearly do have a lot that has been yet to be discovered. So that idea doesn't make any sense. And I would say that if we just stay on oil and gas for another, I don't know, 50, 100 years, maybe by then the technology will have improved. The problem is that um, there's been a ton of money, like we're talking hundreds of billions, possibly even trillions of dollars being pumped into the renewables industry, and yet the technology is still hardly improved. So that's the big problem with renewables. So the whole oil and gas are finite resources argument doesn't really make sense. And the other problem too is that people will contradict themselves by saying this. And then I'll use a simple example too. The government can't keep running massive deficits year after year after year, but yet most of the renewable people, they tend to be more left-leaning people. They'll support stuff like that. They'll be the kind of people that support, well, disproportionately, the kind of people that support UBI, that support all these socialist programs. Um, and again, the government can't keep running massive deficits year after year after year after year, till infinite amount of years. And if you do believe that, then you should believe in the government giving everybody $10,000, $100,000, $1 million a month. Why not? But because if we can keep, you know, printing massive amounts of money to bail ourselves out, well, why not more? So that's the other contradiction that they never really. And again, that's just one of the many too. I'm just using that as an example. It's not like it's just one. So again, that whole, it's a finite resource and it's not sustainable. Again, it's a stupid argument. And I would bet money that the dollar will collapse before we run out of oil and gas. I would bet every possession in dollar I have, because we know we have hundreds of years of oil and gas left, and it wouldn't surprise me if within the next 10 years the dollar collapses. So that's a terrible argument. The other argument is a little bit more debatable, but I still think it's not really debatable. And that's the whole we're destroying the world, climate change, all this kind of stuff again, which I've made plenty of videos about. Climate change is not a huge issue. There isn't a lot of evidence pointing towards it. Now, inevitably, what you get when you debate someone on climate change is they'll throw up a chart, they'll throw up a study that says, oh, the Earth is warming, therefore climate change. But what they don't understand is that nobody's arguing that. And again, that just goes to show that those people have no idea what they're talking about, because what climate skeptics are arguing isn't that the Earth isn't warming or the climate isn't changing. That's not what they're arguing. They're arguing that humans have little to no impact on said climate. So to prove them wrong, you have to prove the link between humans and the climate, not just the climate. So that's the big problem that a lot of these people do. Um, and again, like I always use, a lot of examples. Now, recently, the last couple months, have atmospheric CO2 levels gone down? No, I'm yet to see anyone point that out. Now, there's been much less driving. There's been much less energy use across the world. Has CO2 levels went down? No. I mean, we look at the hottest years on record. They're almost all of them. The vast majority. I mean, the hottest decade was the 1930s. The hottest year I think was like 1936. Like I say, there was years where watching the Tony Heller video, where the average temperature from May through September, or maybe it was just June, July, and August, was hotter than the average, or sorry, the average was hotter than the hottest day in that same month period of time from last year. So just to put that into perspective, just how hot that year was. Now, it was in the 1930s. I don't remember exactly, and it was in a state. It wasn't across the whole country too. But like I said, just to put into perspective, just how much worse things were. Again, Australia too. People say, "Oh, Australian wildfires, climate change." Well, what they don't tell you is that the worst year of fires and flooding both happened in the 1800s in Australia, and they both, I believe it was even back to back years too, which is very crazy to think about. Now imagine if that happened nowadays. It would be, ooh, Green New Deal now, shut all the oil and gas down. Um, like I say, that's not feasible too. So basically, the take home point being here is that regardless of where you stand on the climate change debate, that the people that want to go away from oil and gas need to start acknowledging this kind of stuff. They think that, again, they think that there's zero emissions, but from this kind of stuff too. Like the process for mining batteries that are used in like the Teslas and even the stuff that's used in solar panels is the same, pretty much the same process as mining or drilling for oil. Like there's the big massive diesel trucks, there's the massive drills, all that kind of stuff, to the amount of damage done to the environment. A lot of this stuff is done in Africa. There's a lot of human rights abuses going on there. So people think that the solar panels and the wind turbines just magically show up, but that's not how it works. Like people need to understand this kind of stuff, that there's a lot of downside. I mean, clearly more downside, but at the very least, there's a lot of downside to wind and solar. And the problem is, I've yet to hear someone who's big on wind and solar who acknowledges this kind of stuff. And there's no debate about it too. Like there's no debate that the process of mining for lithium, or the stuff that's used in batteries, is very similar to drilling for oil. It's very similar processing, and a lot of it's done in Africa where there's human rights abuses going on. And that stuff needs to be acknowledged too, because people think that renewables, there's like zero downside whatsoever, when in reality there's plenty of downside. So anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. Appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already. Again, I just got Twitter, so check me out there. Again, you can see my profile here in the bottom left. And last thing, as always, check out my BitChute channel as well if you haven't already.